Hello, everyone. Jesse Gallanar broadcasting to you live from my home office. A lot of you are probably working from home. Some of you might be in the field. Strange times right now, but we appreciate you broadcasting or tuning into our broadcast today. I have a couple people joining me, and we're going to choose to have our cameras on for now and then probably eventually turn them off as we go into presentation mode. So thanks for joining us. Again, Jesse Gallanar with Revizto, Territory Sales Manager for the Pacific Northwest, and I'm out of the Washington, Seattle area. Joining us on the call, we have Brett Settles, our Global Director of Customer Success, Travis Althouse, Implementation Service Manager for the MEP sector, and our guest today is Jonathan Marsh, the CEO of Steel Toe Consulting. Very excited to have Jonathan here. He's been very much of an early adopter of Revizto, and is going to be able to walk us through a lot of the steps that he went through on bringing Revizto into his organization early on. And we also have one of his employees, Travis, previously employed, who previously employed with Jonathan. So let's continue. So if you haven't been tuning in, we have our digital RevUp series. This is the fourth. We have two more remaining. So BIM in the world of social distancing on May 14th, and then winning BIM global best practices. So if you could tune into those, spread the word, we'd appreciate it. We try to have topics that are exciting and relevant to today's market, and also the current climate of what's happening in the world. With a lot of people working remotely and at home offices, we find it pretty relevant to have these webinars. I already introduced everybody, but these are the topics we plan to cover and elaborate pretty deep. We're not going to do a lot of slides in this presentation. We want to keep it relatively conversational and more along the lines of telling stories of how things have worked in the various different organizations. I'll be talking about managing change and the change of your culture when implementing Revizto or any software for that matter. Brett's going to jump into the internal champion and then the creation of that champion and how he's seen it play out in different environments and different organizations. Travis is then going to jump into the virtual training and the use of remote controllers for gamification of Revizto. And then a majority of our times we spent with Jonathan as he explains the further creation and understanding of a champion. We'll do Q&A after that, and if we have time, for those of you that are heavy Revizto users or curious, we will jump into the 5.0, but we're only here for an hour, so we don't want to get too deep into the 5.0 stuff because we really want to make John the star of the show. So a lot of people on the phone have implemented software over their career and understand how software can help or hinder an organization, and it's very common practice to have it be called shelfware. You buy a seat of software, you hopefully go through some type of implementation, and then it sits on the shelf. Nobody uses it, and you never got adoption. And I think a huge part of that lack of adoption is really addressing what it is and why it's successful prior to bringing the software in-house. And it's not just based on the program or the software itself. It really is based on that change management. And in the change management, it's not changing your management, if you haven't heard that phrase before, but literally it's the preparation to your organization of what the changes to come, and the culture behind that. If you don't have a cultural shift in implementing new programs and software, you're truly going to miss the mark. The guidance, finding that internal guidance through upper management is, I think, essential. And then also knowing when to bring in external resources. A lot of people are ego-driven in business sometimes and say, I got it. And if you got it, that's fine. But I think bringing in external resources, there's a lot of resources out there. We provide a lot of them to you too when you do business with us. And then the creation of that champion. So creating that champion through empowerment, I think is something I've seen work really well. Giving them small tasks, bringing them on as their own early adopter into what you're thinking about doing in your organization really makes them feel like they have a seat at the table. And in doing that, having a seat at the table, you begin to create those champions, and oftentimes they rise to the top on the organization. One thing that we talked about often when we implement our product is how Revizto fits into your project workflow. And that workflow has been the way it has been in your organization for a long time. And when you bring in Revizto, there's going to be a very apparent change, and addressing that early on is really imperative. So a change is going to occur, and the important part is really try to embrace that change. Those procedural changes, preparing those, again, I think it's people capital, and then software, and then implementation. It's not necessarily learning the technical aspects of a program like Revizto, but it really is getting that buy-in and that cultural change. And then also removing the silos. And I'm really excited to hear Jonathan speak more about the training in Revizto. Travis is going to cover that as well. And then also involving early on the subs and the trades. I don't think there's any part of BIM or a VDC manager's role that doesn't know that it's really important to involve the trades early on. And that really is the essence of the Build Information Modeling acronym, is getting things done and getting things in early to ensure that there's success down the road.
Hey, Jesse,
yep.
Can I comment real quick on this? Because you have something up here that I think is really important for people to realize. When you're trying to fit it to the workflow, make sure you're not trying to fit it to an analog workflow. Okay, if you have a fully analog workflow and you put in a digital tool like Revizto, it's going to really disrupt that. And I think that's why a lot of people turn away, is they want to keep that analog workflow going. They want to keep their drawings looking like their drawings. You know, I've heard of people dumbing down a 3D model to single line drawings so that they can keep, you know, their workflow the same. I really do think, like with Revizto, one of the things that will help adoption is to realize that you have a disruption going on in your company when you start moving towards this, between your old workflows that were analog and this new one that's digital, that's real time, and is going to allow you to get back that information. So just be aware that when you're adapting it to your workflows, which you have to do, if you have an overly analog workflow, here's the chance to just, I hate to say it, but to sort of throw out a good piece of that and move to that digital platform that's going to be, you know, real time. It's going to be more effective. It's going to allow you to do better things. I know, like when I work with clients, one of the bigger problems can be if they have a workflow that's really tight and really regimented. Trying to get them into a product like this can be tough because they're trying to fit a huge, you know, a product with huge resources into a small resource box. And it's not going to work. So I just wanted to chime in on that, because I think when it comes to that cultural change, if you look at everything as analog versus digital, you'll be a lot further along. Not that Revizto doesn't deal with analog well, it really does, deals with it better than most, but the fact that you're moving to something that's more digital is something that needs to be embraced to get good adoption. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, I think people are finding that the digital era is upon us, whether we wanted to have it or not, because we're forced to work in a remote environment now. So if you hadn't already been doing digital, you are now, or you're missing the mark.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Brett, go ahead and take it away. He's going to talk about our integrated collaboration platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the introductions, Jesse. And thanks a bunch, Jonathan, for the input on that. And thanks for joining us today. And thank you too, Travis. So anyway, everyone on the call, you know, I'm going to be really brief about this because we do want Jonathan to take up the better portion of this discussion that we're having. But one of the things I want to talk about is the verbiage that we're using to describe our platform. One of the things about the integrated collaboration platform is that it really is aimed at the project lifecycle. It's meant to be used in everything from concept to commissioning in a lot of ways. And you know, one of the things that it takes to champion a product, not only like Revizto, let's just talk about all technology for a second, right? The right champions are always going to be the people that have their finger on multiple, well, I would say the pulse of the entire organization for multiple aspects, right? The technical skills are very much an obvious, right? In order to implement software, you have to know how to push the buttons. You have to know how to install it. You have to know how the network works. But that's really only one small factor into what it actually takes to implement technology in an organization. There's a psychological aspect, right? When you have an overall view of what you want to achieve, most of the time, I always explain it this way. A good change management person in technology is answering 40 different questions with very specific answers that tie into a single vision that they have about how they want the product to work or how they want the situation to play out. There's a lot of psychology that goes into that. You have to convince people that you're helping them specifically while using what you're deploying to them to really, really add value to the entire project as a whole. It's not an easy concept because not only do you have to get those answers to fall into place, but then you have to go back to the first point that I was talking about, which was getting the technology to follow what you're getting these people to agree upon. Not only that, but then you have to tie in the financial aspect. How are you not only managing the psychology and the technology, but how are you proving that what you're implementing is even valuable to the bottom line? And these are all things that go into a champion. And in our industry, one of the things that I see a lot of are titles, right? BIM manager, VDC director. I've seen people with these same titles that some get treated like C-level executives and some get treated like the way we treated drafters, you know, in the early 2000s. So whenever you're talking about, if you're an executive listening and you really want change in your company, you need to give these people the power to really focus on these 3 or 4 different aspects that are going to be crucial to employing or deploying this software. Because if they only have control over one of these things and not the other, they are going to fail. And, you know, in my past experience, I did this for 6 years at a, you know, an EPC myself. And, you know, as much as I hate to get on here on a webinar and say that I failed for the first 3 years, right, is really not fun for me to do. But if I'm being honest with everyone, that's exactly what happened. And as I proved what needed to happen and showed results over time, you started to gain that trust. But without all of those things in place, and a true internal champion over any piece of technology, whether we're talking data viz, we're talking drawing standards, it's going to be very difficult for those people to get it done. But you have to also pick the right person, because that person has to have an idea of how an integrated collaboration platform can tie into every aspect of the business and add benefits, but also overcome the challenge of such an integrated environment and kind of the data silos that we face on a day-to-day basis, right? Jonathan said it really great, analog workflows. Those are pretty much primarily made up of data silos where we port information into these silos. People work together inside of them. They emerge from their cave and realize that, oh, all these other parts of the project were moving at the same time and what we were putting together is no longer viable. That's why transparency is so important. And it takes a true champion that has the power inside of their company to connect all these dots together. So, you know, when we talk about the creation of a champion, I work with organizations day in and day out. I've probably talked to 1,000 companies at this point. And whenever we're identifying the champion, one of the things that goes on behind closed doors is we have conversations about, does this person may be smart enough, but do we feel like this person has the power to push something? And sometimes you get the inverse of that. Sometimes people have the power to push something, but they don't have the capability. So regardless of what type of technology you're pushing, I think it's very crucial that you really, really sit back and think about the type of champion you're choosing and thinking about, do they have the long-term vision and the skill set to actually be a champion for whatever product that is, and can they add value to all sectors of the business at the same time? So that's my piece, and well, yeah, we can go ahead and move on, Jesse. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate you listening to me stand on my soapbox for a second.
Thanks, Brett. And I just want to, oh, Jesse, you're on mute there. All right, so I just wanted to talk on, yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit on what Jesse touched on is that psychology aspect of it, and a lot of what John said earlier too, the analog versus digital, and trying to kind of bridge that gap. And one of the big things, and I don't think I can take over the screen, but one of the big things I wanted to share was that I put a little snippet on LinkedIn about using the PlayStation controller to navigate. Something as simple as that takes something from being somebody's job that they have to do till 9 p.m. at night and makes it something fun, you know, that they can show off to their friends, or can say, hey, look at this. And they're like, what game are you playing? Oh, it's work. It's the basement mechanical room, you know. I guess I'm probably not the only guy that's that nerdy. So I just wanted to point out that keeping that psychology and that morale up is definitely a big deal, and identifying and maintaining these champions and really giving them the momentum to push, like Brett said. So with that, one of the people that really enabled me to do that was Jonathan. So here's Jonathan.
Well, I'm going to talk right to what you just said, because I think it's pretty important to remember when we're putting in this software. When I was working with Travis, we first started to go mobile, and we had this little discussion about what's important about going mobile. This guy that I didn't always agree with, standing in the back, he says, we got to use iPads. And I said, why do we have to use iPads? He said, well, iPads are cool and they have status on a job site. And I was like, you're kidding me. And he goes, no. He says, it actually has status on a job site. And I'll tell you, if you go around a job site with Revizto open on a mobile device, spinning through the model at 20 miles per hour, you are going to get some status associated with that. And that's going to help drive it's going to help drive adoption on that job site. But it also really perks morale in the person who's using it. Because one of the things that Revizto does better than anything else, and it's going back, Brett, to what you said about it being a collaboration platform, is it makes you sort of the center of data on a job site. You know, there's two types of leadership. There's that type of leadership where we call that dude over there a leader, and therefore he's a leader. And then there's the type of leadership where that guy over there gets stuff done and knows what's to do and knows how to get it right. And when I get information from him, I don't end up, you know, swallowing my shirt at the end of the day or having to backtrack. And I have found across the board, when I put this in as a platform, that was one of the stronger motivations, was if you're using this, you're in control of, and can we swing back? I got to swing back to Brett's slide because I think it's an awesome slide. So let's look at this real quick. So let's look, so that little mark there, that is the Revizto mark, is not just Revizto, that's the operator. The operator of Revizto is the leadership that you have on your project that can get to all of these things. You know, and that's really transitional in a project, because before what you had, like Brett was saying, is you had a silo for the source of information. You had a silo for the production of the drawings, a silo for the field issues, a silo for design. And as those start to come down, we also start to build these people that have this range of stuff that they can look at all at once, okay? And this is, in my mind, this is the motivation for most of the champions that do well in Revizto, is where they would like to stand on every project, is they would like to be that leader that gets self-elected by all of the people around them, not because they had the best job or they had the best education, because they will tell you the right answer because they can see all of this information that comes in. I will say this, so Travis worked for me for a year and a half. Was it that long, Travis, or a little less? On one project, a year and a half. I was there for 3 years. He was there for 3 years. He worked primarily on that one project for a
Doesn't
year.
Doesn't matter. Just twice as long.
When you're having fun, right, guys?
Right.
Yeah, time flew.
Yeah.
But But I would say this. So one of the things Travis didn't know is actually, and I do this with all of my clients. So I have a bunch of clients throughout the United States. And typically when you walk into an organization, you're actually not going to see a single champion. You'll see the parts and pieces of a champion in this guy, or parts and pieces of a champion in that guy. And so as I dealt with more and more people after leaving the organization with Travis, I realized something. I realized that when I was there, I picked two champions, two types of champions. I picked a dynamic champion, okay? And the dynamic champion was Travis. And the dynamic
60%.
champion, yeah. And this is the dynamic champion's job. The dynamic champion understands the range of stuff going on in the project. And he takes that tool and he tries it with everything. It was difficult to stop Travis from trying new things with Revizto. I would have to go out of my way to stop Travis from trying new things with Revizto. Well, if you're trying to find a champion that's going to make lasting change in your organization, though, it needs another piece. And usually that other piece is what I call the static champion, okay? They want to find static solutions. Static solutions are yes, no, fill in the block, do it this way every time, okay? It is very seldom that I find a champion that sort of epitomizes both those things. So what I typically do is this. I look for my Travis, who's going to be my dynamic champion in the organization or in the field or in the fab shop. And I say to this dynamic champion, I say, you have free reign. Here's the tools. And I trust in their sort of self-motivated people. They start to just pile on the possible solutions. And then what I do is I typically go find somebody else that I know this will make insane because he's breaking rules and rules should be kept and all of those things. And I help bring that person in as my static champion. What they do is they look at where Travis is doing things and they say, what can I make into a rule? What can I make into a process? What can I make into something that's sustainable? And if you can find both those people in one place, that's awesome. But I so often don't do that. And I think that really will, like, if you are struggling with a bunch of that software that ended up on the shelf, the number one thing you can do is start realizing that you can have two types of champion. You can have the dynamic champion that I have at, I'm working with another firm and they have two dynamic champions, one in the field, one in the VDC. And both of them are sort of wild men about finding new ways to use this. In this case, their VDC head, super good guy at reining that in, making them into static long-term solutions. So he is that process engineer that looks at all of this innovation going on and brings that together. And so what I've been able to do, and this has been pretty consistent with almost all the firms I've been working with lately. And I don't just work with Revizto, I work with all of the products. So I have a little bit different, like this is particularly of importance when you're dealing with a platform product. So a platform product needs that dynamic guy. If you're dealing with just like a simple solution, like I got a time card app, you do not need a dynamic leader for that. It's unnecessary to have a dynamic leader. But a platform app can be leveraged and leveraged and leveraged to allow your business to do more. That's what those dynamic champions are about. There also tend to be the energy behind the move, okay? So they are the energy behind the move. Your static champion, he's gonna be sort of, I hate to say it, he is gonna be the downer because he's gonna tell you, that's awesome that you were able to do that, but I can't repeat it, therefore it has no value. And you've heard that from me, Travis, plenty of times.
Oh yeah, just put my head down and walk out.
Yes.
Jonathan, you bring up a really good point. And what's funny is what you're saying really goes back to, and let's go, back to 2010, right? In the industrial side of things. So the reason that I'm going to equate the dynamic champion and the static champion, even though I personally have never used those two terms, you're exactly right, because when we were implementing Revit for the first time on the design side, which is very similar, the conversations about Revit back in the late 2000s is extremely similar to the conversations that I have about Revizto today, right? Where, do we really need this? Is this something that's going to provide value long-term? Is this a fad? People in 2007 thought Revit was a fad. But anyway, aside from that point, The dynamic champion in my organization were those guys with 2 to 3 years experience, a ton of ambition to take over the world, and virtually zero actual experience, right?
Correct.
My static champion was the CAD manager of 18 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how that worked, where the younger, more ambitious group that really didn't know what rules they were breaking, right? They didn't understand that they were even breaking rules because they didn't know how to do anything yet. They would come up with these wild ideas, and the CAD manager, who eventually turned into that BIM manager, was able to, you know, tamp those ideas back into something realistic, profitable, and usable in our process.
And that's the perfect dynamic to have between those two people. The reason I said dynamic and static champion, I got to fill you in on this is, so you guys have seen the movie Top Gun. Anybody ever seen that? Okay. So the idea of the Top Gun Academy was that all these guys were learning from these static analog books about how to fly, and they were flying formation. They were doing static action. They were making static decisions. And this guy, he's actually an Erie guy. He came in and said, this isn't going to work. You need to make dynamic decisions, which means you need to realize that when you're in the face of battle, which I view the job site as a battle at times, you have all of this information coming in that guy's not going to have. That guy in the BDC shop without Revizto is going to be making static choices. He doesn't have that dynamic information coming in, you know? And so that's why I tend to use those two buckets a lot, because they really help me to explain, like, VDC guys from time immemorial get beat up by field guys. That is like, if we had VDC guys listening, they'd all raise their hand. I guess I get beat up by my foreman on a regular basis. But it's because we can't make dynamic decisions. We don't have that dynamic information. You don't know that there is a scissor lift over there. You don't know that the crane can only raise this much weight because you're not on job site. One of the things that Revizto did, and that happened to Travis, and I'm saying this because, Brett, what you said about those people being younger and having less experience, is while Travis didn't have the experience, the sort of the wisdom of being on the job site for a long time, he had all the information to make dynamic decisions. So it sure as hell looked like he had all that experience. He also had all these people with vast amounts of experience just feeding into him. You know, and again, when you're using one of these platforms like this that aggregates all of that data, brings it together into one spot, you look like a superhero. I mean, Travis, you know, we had a rule.
I don't know about that.
We did have a rule at my last employer that said no capes. You weren't allowed to be Superman all by yourself.
Oh, yeah.
That's dangerous.
Yep.
But you sit down in a coordination meeting and you have a dynamic understanding of what's going on. You'll be the guy that's saying, I really love that design, but you can't do that. You know why? Because there's no way we're going to get it through the door, because there's a bunch of temporary stuff in the way, you know? And that's the stuff that was never happening. That happens when you have a collaboration tool like this. But I didn't want to get too far off the subject, but the fact that the dude from Top Gun that designed that was from Erie, I had to put it in there.
Is that who Tom Ridge is? Is that Tom Ridge? Oh, okay.
He's just a really cool governor. This guy had written military tactics, and his tactics said the best leadership in a harsh environment, in a wicked environment, is the guy that has all this information coming in. And I've always felt that that's what Revizto did for me. It's why I liked using the product. But I did get off of the subject of sort of the champions, which I want to get back to, because I bet right now there are a lot of people that do have the dynamic champion, because if you look at people, they're like, yes, I have the dynamic champion, but he never finishes anything. If you are a company out there that says that your dynamic champion or your champion isn't finishing anything, you need to put in that static guy. You need to hook him up with that guy, okay? And you know who he is, and he probably is who Brett said he is. He's probably the guy that's been there for 15 years. It's his process. He knows the process. He wants you inside of the process, and he will help you sort of bring that together. That's usually the missing piece, you know, and I see it again and again. A lot of times the other missing piece is if you have two champions, or if you have a good champion and you're seeing that they're struggling, make sure, like Brett had said, that they have enough space to work. It's not just having the authority, but it's having enough space to work. If you've built a bunch of constraints about what they have to write down, where they have to go, how they have to do it, you're going to struggle a little bit getting this done. That's why it's nice to have more dynamic guy going after adoption and the more sort of static guy, the guy that's writing down the rules, right, coming behind him. But so Travis, do you have any guess who the static guy was other than me at our former employer?
I do. I have a couple of guesses.
Give me
and
a guess.
I would heavily agree.
Do you have a guess?
Yeah, Chris. Chris was definitely the static.
Yes, I had
guy.
2 designers that, like you said, Brett, man, had been there forever. And they were my guys that were like, nope, check valve. We want him to stop and go back to getting stuff done. And that was really good. And in the other companies, what I've noticed is there's a little bit less of that coming in from the individual designers, a little bit more of that coming in from the leadership. If you can't afford it, the leader should probably be the person that's trying to take the dynamic information and sort of write down the steps, the process, and everything along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'd like to kind of throw some stuff on top of everything that you've been saying, and also kind of relate it to our current situation, right? Virtual training is something that we're all going to be doing more of, at least over the next 6 months, and hopefully not, but potentially further. But there are many organizations out there that already have a handle on this, right? Especially organizations that work over vast, vast distances. One of the things about a platform-based software, the right champions and contextual information, is that it can accelerate the adoption process of any of these tools. So I'll give you another personal example. At my old company, about 100 of our designers lived and worked in Mumbai, India. And these were CAD drafters, right? When I came on board, these were CAD drafters. They were good at what they did, but this was not a BIM savvy group. And as we moved into, once again, I'll use Revit as an example, there was a massive time difference, a massive distance difference, and we had to figure out a way to bring this team up to speed, halfway around the world. And, the way that we did that was obviously through virtual communication. Now, that's just one aspect to what the platform can provide. I can communicate with anyone, anywhere in the world on a phone, but what I can't do is show them the other pieces of context that we need to discuss and observe and make decisions around why I'm on that phone call. So then I have to go to another piece of media. And then we have 2 pieces of media going. Well, maybe I need to look at spreadsheets now. Now we're up to 3. Now we're going to 4. What I found by putting everything contextually together and allowing people to conversate around all of that information that is together provides a deeper and more direct understanding when you're trying to train people over these distances. And it goes back to what Travis and Jonathan were saying. Travis has told some amazing stories about what he learned and how he learned essentially what field foremen and what fabricators were looking for without ever stepping foot in the field. And the reason why is because that was contextually one thing to look at, right? Travis wasn't trying to take analog feedback, digest it, and relate it to something else. That analog feedback was laying right over top of the digital environment and allowing him to see both together. And I think that that's really important and really became a big accelerator in what I used to do with my teams, right? We were always looking for ways to put more context in the same spot. And we made some progress with that. But once we found a platform that allowed all of this to come together, that communication, all that information, we actually seen a lot of progress in the way that design was moving on that side of the world, just because there was more instant and deeper understanding about what they were looking
I think that's one of the things that both me and Travis saw as we had a situation in which there was a person who was given very little analog guidance. They were just not made drawings. That's what ended up happening. This guy did not have a company that was making drawings for him. And we had extended Revizto out to him. What we noticed pretty quick is that this guy got really good at that model.
Yeah.
And he really learned that building with this platform. And I got to say, it's one of those things where because it's bringing all this information together and it's making it easy to get at, that's been the biggest driver I've seen is it's easy to use Revizto. I regularly use Revizto in meetings with clients to explain their fab shop or to take notes during a meeting. Because I know something. I know that if I bring in the pictures of the fab shop, the model of the fab shop, the stuff that's going on in there, and then I start recording all of their information, I'm not going to lose anything. And losing stuff is huge.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we used to go to the field as a PM, I don't know if you guys were a PM, I was a PM for a while. You go out to the field, you talk to the guy there, you go back to the office, you would retain 10% of that. You had to go all the way out to the field. He had to separate himself from what he was doing, try to remember all the stuff he had. And the second we put out just issue tracking, like just the issue tracking part alone, all of a sudden we were getting real answers from the field. We were getting real problems from the field. We were getting 30 questions instead of 3, but they were all questions that saved money.
Yeah, and they were direct.
Questions.
Instead of it being hey, this project over here, this floor, this bathroom that you have to go searching for, no, they can make the issue right there with your digital context. And then as a designer, I just double click on that to be able to jump in there and fix it, So both ways, I just learned something and we got the job done faster than we were before. But more importantly, now we have that saved and we can add a little tag to that. I call it lessons learned. And we can circle back and teach the whole team that, because like John said, we're not losing that. It's staying with us. It's staying as part of the process that we can reform, which is really nice.
One of the things I thought Travis did really well, and Travis, I don't know if I ever mentioned it, is he realized that if this worked fast, people would adopt it. So if he saw something come in from the field, it became his primary goal to get that issue solved.
Yeah, what was the verb?
Yeah, go ahead.
What was the verb that I used when I got yelled at? Did you Revizto it? That's it became a verb. If you came to yell at me about something, I had to ask, like, is it Reviztoed? Because if not, I probably didn't see it. There were several buckets going on. We were, like John said, we were working with some less tech savvies, and then at the same time, we were still kind of going through coordination. We had a really good GC that was keeping up our models and keeping that going. But at the same time, you're trying to learn to build and focus on building, which is where we make our money as MEPs, So it made it really nice to I had a GC bucket to respond to for coordination, but then I had these direct things like, oh, that guy's really going to yell if I don't get this fixed tomorrow. So I would expedite it and I'd talk them into using this platform by saying, hey, I can get it done by next Friday if you email me, or tomorrow if you Revizto it,
And I backed them up in that. If someone came in and said it's not done, I asked what issue number it was.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, it's like, well, what issue number it was? Well, it couldn't have been that important if you didn't make it an issue.
Yep.
And it didn't take long before the people that want their projects to be done on time, the leaders of the field, said, okay, if I want to get ahead of other people, all I got to do is put mine in Revizto and let you talk.
Yep.
You can talk in a meeting, or you can put it as an issue with a due date, and then it becomes transactional.
Yep. The transactional thing is big because then you can take advantage of that static champion. And I was able to just be like, hey, are you busy? Can you take 20 of these issues? And they just nail them. They're no fight, no fuss. They don't want to blaze any trail. They just want to get the work done. It's rewarding for them, which was really nice. You learn how to dish out that work with something like this.
And one thing that I think is really important that we haven't specifically said in this conversation is, if you notice, the way our conversation is trending is that the more interactive and the quicker these exchanges are, the more people learn, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things where I've seen people manage virtual training a couple different ways. I've seen it very homework based, right? Like, hey, you're 12 hours on the other side of the world. Here's a laundry list of things. I need you to do those, and then I'll make sure that those are done tomorrow. And what I found is that that type of virtual training is very ineffective because it doesn't prompt anyone to have any sort of interest or any sort of desire to do it. It's the same way as it's the same way you felt when you were a 7th grader and the math teacher goes, here's 120 problems on a worksheet, instead of diving into why math is important in class, right? Like, why do you need math? Well, you need math to balance your checkbook, to do your taxes, to do all these things that are practical and provide value for those human beings. Doing 120 problems on a spreadsheet, isn't going to do that. And so when we enact virtual training with these different crowds, the more you can pump up the interactivity, which is something that you naturally get by being in the same room, right? Interactivity is not something that you have to put effort into when you're all standing there looking at each other. So that's a really, really important aspect of this. And I think it supports where John and Travis were very successful, is that as the interactivity increased, so did the learning, and so did the desire to learn more. And I think that plays a super important role.
Yeah. So Travis, did you get a chance to go through Young's environment there and see his gamification of Revizto?
Yeah, speaking of the gamification, so it's really cool that something like Revizto, so we have a client that put a virtual job board up, so 3D job board that you log in each day or whatever, and however often you want to update it, and here's your job board of stuff to do. They're actually using it to kind of make it more fun. I think he hit a R2D2 somewhere in the model, which would be awesome. And it's like whoever gets that gets a free box of donuts or something on Friday, some little incentive, but it just makes it more fun, makes it everybody likes to compete, it makes it competitive. But in all reality, you're just learning how to navigate a virtual environment, which is where I think the whole industry needs to go. So it's really cool to see a software like Revizto kind of bridging that and letting these people digest this in an understandable environment.
Yeah, I mean, most everybody I know plays stuff other than me. I don't play video games, but other people play a lot of multiplayer video games.
Yep, sometimes.
I have to say, to this day, me and Travis talk almost all the time about how close that environment is to the environment you're at when you're using Revizto.
Yep.
It's a really cool environment to just spend some time in, and the more time they spend in there, the better they are, the faster they are, the more it becomes their mode of getting stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
So I go out to these clients and they say, well, we're good at this and we're good at that. And I almost ask them every time, can I get a project that I can upload into Revizto? And I go through their project and look at their underwear, basically. This is all of the dirty parts of their model, all of the problems that they have with their information, all of the stuff that's not getting done. And I can make a good assessment, where are the problems? Because it just is, it's robust enough to support that type of interaction.
Right. And the cool thing about that is you could do it on your iPad instead of opening up Revit or Navisworks or something and bogging it down on the couch at 9 p.m.
Well, it's about that. It's about that accessibility, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Revit is a phenomenal tool. It changed my life for the better, to be completely honest.
John's too.
But but it's not something that someone that doesn't live and breathe it for 3 or 4 years is ever going to be able to use it at an effective level.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there can be detriment to getting people in there that don't know what they're doing, right? Same thing with Navisworks. Same thing with any of these tools where things are being coordinated or authored. And I think that's really important, right? Like, I have horror stories about, all right, we're doing all these digital practices. My senior, the chief engineers, who we need their knowledge. We absolutely have to have it, but they have to be able to interject that knowledge into what we're doing. The further we go down the virtual path, the more they feel disconnected from what we're actually doing. And it was really important to get them involved. But when we did get them involved, one of them transformed a steel model, 4 hours before a coordination meeting with all of our specialty contractors. And then, you talk to him tomorrow and you're like, hey, did you check the model? And he goes, oh, I'm never using it again. And that's where having not only the ability to communicate, make these exchanges, but also have something that's accessible and democratize the process. Because one of the biggest problems that I see with pretty much, this is not a specific to anybody problem, this is an industry problem, is that you start to cage up these technical people. And they do a good job inside of their own realm, but if only 15% of your company is using digital practices, you're missing out on potentially 65 to 70% more of those project participants that can gain value from not only tools like ours, but all the other tools that are in the ecosystem.
One of the things that I just explained to a client was he was going to have a meeting to go over constructability on some models. And they're like, I want the BIM team to make sure they have drawings ready. And I shot him back a little email. I said, if we're making drawing, it's too late. It's too late if we're making drawings. I don't want your input at the point where I'm making drawings. I want it during the model. And I'd rather you spend the time with me with a tool like this where you can get into it. I think you guys suffer a little bit at Revizto from what I call a technology exhaustion. And that has been caused by a lot of these other ways to work with models. If I bring somebody into a Navisworks, they had to set up this computer and make sure it was right and download the driver and blah. It goes on, and Navisworks is probably the simplest of the ways to do that, other than this. And you don't have all that interaction. I'm dealing right now with so many clients with multiple platforms, multiple ways to do this. Some of them forced by the GC, some of them adopted just by individual companies. I see it all the time where because there are so many technology tools that are hard to use, people are just turned off. They're just turned off. And I think if you can get, I hate to say it, I think if you could get Revizto or some of these simpler tools into your workflow, you're actually building adoption for things down the road too. Because if this tool works and they've put the time in, they're going to want it in this tool. But if they don't get it in this tool, at least they've had a positive experience with technology. Some of the biggest problems I have is when VDC first starts in an organization, what inevitably happens is there's 2 points where the foreman gets a negative experience. One is when it's first getting started, there's some negative experiences there. And the other is when there's too much work to do. In those two negative experiences, when you're talking to foremen about how they feel about BIM and technology, that dominates the conversation. That's 90% of the conversation is the way it was at the beginning and the way it is when there's too much work to do. And so with these other programs where there's a lot of work to do to get this information, that wears them out for years.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, it does a little bit. But I think if you can get Revizto implemented, especially with some of these non-technical people, just give them the option at the very least. They will have some success, and success drives success. If they're successful here, it will push them to go to the next step, to try something else, to try that next piece that you're going to need to have in there. And there's certainly lots of pieces that are needed for a good tech stack. And I think another cool thing about this is you are not trying to replace all those pieces. You're just trying to aggregate them together. I do not need to replace Revit in order to be successful. I just need to grab it and aggregate it in and make it part of my product so that everybody can get at it. And that's huge.
How often did I use Revizto to teach you guys shortcuts in Revit? It's a real simple communication. Like, I'm frustrated I can't get this model to show up, and I'm like, hey, use these 2 keys, and then I'd add the lesson learned tag, and then I'd teach the whole department. It's real simple. So,
and I think that's something that we should talk about, especially with Jess. You come in from working with more GCs than us. Is when the GC comes in and he wants to push out Revizto and people are using other things, what do you think are some of the key ways that he can drive adoption in all of these subcontractors? Because in a real way, if you want a successful Revizto job, you can't just say, everybody do it in Revizto. That will not happen. Have you seen anything you thought was like practical along those lines? Because that's one of the areas where I don't get into it.
Yeah, it's generally coming from a VDC manager, and those VDC managers are generally the champions, and that champion has a credibility with the organization, and they also establish a process and a procedure behind how they're getting the adoption. They don't just say, "Hey, here's a new shining toy." They actually spend time with us and our implementation team to actually go through the steps to learn how the organization is going to adopt this and have it rolled out. So it's a very specific rollout that we undergo to make sure there's adoption.
I know, so me and Travis experienced a little bit of a weird adoption story where the GC or the CM, who we love, if he's listening, we love you, Matt.
He left. He was here. He was here earlier.
He was simultaneously implementing Revizto for their company, and we had been on Revizto for just a few years. And I will tell you this, if you want to get better at Revizto, have it be two companies going at it, because I think we learn from each other really, really well. To this day, I use workflows that Matt kind of taught me, and I would hope that to this day, he's still using a couple workflows that we taught him to do things better. But I've noticed that with the GCs is it gives you a much more interpersonal relationship with them. The people that I've worked, and I've only got to do a few jobs as a coordinator. I'm doing more actually now. We do occasional BIM jobs too for architectural type things. When they're on Revizto with me, I end up having a relationship with them because we end up communicating directly, where normally it would go through a PM or someone else. And I thought that was huge culturally with getting the VDC people to understand how important what they're doing is. Because if they're talking to the leads on the project, it's very different than talking to your PM who goes to a meeting, who talks to somebody else. You're getting your information straight from the source most of the time if you're using that collaborative platform. You know what I mean?
Yep. And that's what really helped us on our project from that top perspective, kind of pushing it. It really let all of the subs, it empowered us all to teach each other, you know. I learned a lot about electrical from the electrical guy using Revizto. He learned a lot about mechanical. I'm not sure we ever wanted to know the stuff that we learned, but now we know, you know, it doesn't hurt anybody. We just saw it in passing because it was on that platform.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a really powerful tool. It's like indirect learning also, you know, which is really nice.
The last thing I would put on that is I did already run into a couple of GCs who have pushed alternate products down on me. And I love the way that Revizto can just suck out the stuff from Navisworks, because that's what I'd do. I'd suck out all the issues from Navisworks. I'd show up at the meeting and I'd go through it in my format.
Transactional. Yep.
Yeah. And it ends up being way faster, a way better environment to sort of get that work done and see how it's working out.
Yep. I appreciate that, guys. We're down to 5 minutes here, and I wanted to open up the lines, or if anybody wants to put in the text chat for the Q&A. We're here to address any questions that you guys have, and please feel free to reach out to John separately. But if you have questions now that would benefit the group, we'd very much like to hear them. So please feel free. And I actually, Brett, do you know how to unmute the lines for everybody? I'm in here. I can't figure it out.
Good question.
yeah. I'm in here. It's not showing me where.
Let me see here real quick. So we've got all the attendees here. You know, Jesse, I think you've stumped me. Let's see here.
Did Dan pop up? You can hit allow to talk.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, Dan.
Yeah, so we've got an allow to talk button. So if anyone's got a question, type into chat. We'll unmute you and allow you to ask your question.
Yeah, that's gonna be the better.
That's how you do it.
So Byron, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead and ask the question here. So let's find Byron in here. All right, Byron, you are live.
All right, great. So the main issue we have at our architecture firm with Revizto is just how to convince the folks outside of the office to adopt it, right? it's one thing to be able to have your champion within the office and to have him or her be cognizant of all the advantages and convey those within the architecture firm. However, whenever you're trying to coordinate issues across the disciplines, like if there's a structural coordination MEP, whatever it may be, it would be really nice to maybe, if you guys have any tips to specifically to those disciplines about how you might be able to convince them that this is a great platform to spend their time on, you know?
So, John, I'll go first, but I know you got something to say.
I do. Go for it.
So I'll be real quick. One of the things that we do as Revizto, and I'll let Jonathan talk more as, you know, someone that uses our tool outside of the company, but one of the things that my team likes to focus on, and something that you've seen from the hires that we've made on the technical team over the last few years, is that we're bringing on industry specific professionals. And the reason that we've done that is because there is value to be had for each type of vertical of industry, right? So as an architect, if you're working with your potential trades or your GC, it may be, you know, I think that most of you can do a pretty good job of this, but there may be a situation where, and we see this from GCs to subs all the time, where the specific value of that outside partner is not conveyed to them. It is more about what we need you to do so that we can get value. And we see that a lot from the GCs. So one of the things that Travis does is that it's very common for an MEP firm to say, well, yeah, we can see that it works, but this just seems like an advantage to the GC. And that's where someone like Travis will pop up and say, no, the reason that it seems that way is because you met with the GC. Let us talk about what's valuable for you outside of the way that you communicate with them. Same thing with architects, right? If you're looking to get some of your engineers on board, or you know, you're looking to push Revizto into CA work or anything like that, that is where maybe you just need to give us a call and say, look, this is what I'm trying to do. What have you guys done in the past to facilitate this? And usually what will happen is we'll bring in myself or our design manager, and he can communicate with those people about where their specific value is, uncover what's beneficial for them, and usually we see a lot more enthusiasm to adopt whenever they start to see what values them, what creates value for them personally.
I'm going to give you some practical advice, I think. The first thing I would do is I'd go into their reporting functions and I'd start to put it, I'd probably do a weekly. I'd probably pick someone on their team that's going to receive a weekly report about issues. One of the things that I noticed was really interesting is if I started to use the automatic reporting and send it off to the people that were outside of my team, I got questions about where in the world did you get a report like this? This is a really valuable report. And then I started to send emails with dashboards, you know, get a dashboard set up that shows you project tracking. And when you start the meeting, start with looking at that dashboard. Because what I found is with the subs that I really don't have a hand in, I had to make informational incentives. I had to give them some type of information that was going to incentivize them to use it. I usually did do the weed and seed thing where I would seed whoever I thought would be most likely to use it with a free license. And then if they didn't use it, I'd weed it out. But usually, you know, I did it the other way around. I was sitting in a mechanical, I was trying to get architects to use it. And that was a lot easier. Architects seemed to go right in. Structural guys, I tended to try to send them as many, try to send them a weekly report that's coming out of Revizto. It does really good reports. Try to use Revizto when you're doing the coordination meetings with them, because as people watch you use it, they see how easy it is to keep track of their issues. Once they've seen how easy it is for you to use, it's much more easy to drive adoption amongst them. It really is a little harder top down. I was bottom up though, and if you were receiving a report from me every 2 weeks on all the outstanding issues along with answers, and if every time you had a meeting with me, I was going back to Revizto to show you where those issues were, sooner or later, you just preferred to do your own, you know? So I would start with reports, make a set of reports that is, okay, we have a client, we're gonna be working with them all the time. this is the information they need to know. Let's automate it so that they always get that. And then on the emails with them, send a screenshot of the dashboard or a printout of the dashboard. And then finally, when you're doing coordination meetings, make sure that the collaboration environment you're using for that meeting is Revizto. I think that's the best you can do sometimes.
Yep.
I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Byron. If you have any follow-up questions, please let us know. We have territory managers in the area that can help assess your guys' situation and go from there.
Yep.
So in closing, we are at the top of the hour. And also, if those people that have attended a majority of these rev ups have interest in having them go longer, we're definitely open for feedback. We had a couple suggestions that would state that we'd have like a panel like we're doing now, and then for a second hour, we'd have more of a user group environment. We're going in more detail with the user group team and whomever wants to join and really share kind of stories from their environment too. But we still have continued and have pushed for the 30-day trial that's going until June 1st. And our Revizto X2, which is doubling all of your licenses. So for current customers, in light of what's happening in the global environment, we've doubled the licenses, and that continues now until June 1st. And that really concludes our webinar for today. Please follow up if you have any questions. We'll be sending out the recording of this, so if you need to forward it on to coworkers or people that need to see the static champions versus the champions that are going to be a little bit more focused on certain environments. So we appreciate you joining today, and thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Take care.
Stay safe.